textiles from the late medieval period don't tend to survive, they just disintegrate. But because this had been deposited in a bog, it meant that the textile survived. So it's actually very rare to have a complete dress surviving in this way.
Quite extraordinary, the tailoring in it. I would never have thought there was so much to it.
For some reason, I was emotionally involved with that dress. The owner of that dress was calling me to, restore it, and there was a reason why the dress was there.
It's such a tangible piece of Irish history that tells and weaves in the stories of Irish women, but also the importance of the area of Shinrone, the area of Offaly itself, and where the gown was actually found.
400 years later, all those elements that went into making the dress in the 1600s went into making the dress in 2024.
The Shinrone Gown was actually discovered before this museum existed at all. It was discovered in 1843 in a bog near Shinrone, County Offaly.
So we understand that it was found in the bog in the spring of 1843 by two workmen, and based on the fact that it was in spring, they were probably doing drainage works at that stage. The dress then was bought by a local archaeologist called Aquila Smith from Nina. He had connections to the Shinrone area. He purchased it and then sold it to a gentleman called Mr. Walker in Sligo, who had a private collection.
Eventually his collection was sold to the Duke of Northumberland. He subsequently actually donated it to the Royal Irish Academy, and in 1890, when the National Museum of Ireland opened as the Dublin Museum of Science and Art, their collection came here. So it had a long journey actually from finding in the bog to arriving here in the National Museum, where it's now on display, but it's been here since the museum opened.
We identified only recently through a lady called Eileen Patterson, who resides in Shinrone, that she actually has pointed out where the dress was found. And it's quite interesting because it's a silver gate, and on the left side is Tipperary, and on the right side is Offaly. And so because the dress was found on the right side of the laneway going down on this county boundary, we can claim it to be in County Offaly.
When you look at the Shinrone Gown, for example, it's quite close to the Dutch vlieger, which is this sleeveless dress, and that lovely half-hanging sleeve of the Shinrone Gown, in order to fit those billowing Lena sleeves underneath, that is quintessentially Irish, but also you can see echoes of it across Europe. It's actually of European style as well. There's also an idea that there is a much wider story at play, that there's an internationalisation of those styles too.
There are many challenges of conserving the textile, and probably the biggest one is a preventive challenge. So moths love clothes, as you know, so we have to constantly monitor. Now it's in a sealed case, so it's secure as it is. Light can affect textiles and organic materials from the past, and our job in the museum is to preserve these for future generations. We are only looking after them so that they will be there in the future. So if you were to flood this object with light, it would not survive in the long term.
Well, the background story to the Shinrone Gown is that while the community were aware of it for many years because it had been brought to prominence by Noel McMahon's book on the history of Shinrone, much of the conversation was around how could we bring it back into the community, the dress. And I suppose it's such decentralise our material culture to some extent, while respecting the fact that it has a nationally important artefact, it needed to remain in the museum.
There's nothing more important than people actually connecting with objects and connecting those objects with their local area, because while we can look after it well here, what happens is that things are out of their context. So being able to put something back in context and to have that connection with the local area is something that we always want to promote, and we're really delighted about.
So what we decided to do was to commission a replica of the Shinrone Gown and been true and faithful to the original as it is in the National Museum, while also recognising a slight modern interpretation in terms of the elements that were missing from the original gown. And it was a matter of assembling a team of people who were based within our community, had an emotional connection to the project in terms of skin in the game effectively, who could work with the community in terms of a series of workshops to draw out and explore different themes and different topics and different dimensions to the gown. You could say the technical design, then the artistic design, and then the interpretive dimension to it, as into who wore it, when did they wear it, why did they wear it, how did they wear it, for what purpose was it intended, and then I suppose the great question is, why did it end up in a bog on the Offaly side of Shinrone?
Well, I've known Rosalind since I've been in Borough practically, and we've worked together on lots of different projects. We worked on the theatre, costumes and stuff like that. And Jerry met her one day and said, "Can you make dresses?" And she said, "No, but I do know a tailor." And so she asked me, and I went, "Oh, I'd love to do that." So we went up to have a look at the dress, and I fell in love with it.
Initially, both of us were very, very excited, but the trepidation began to set in. A sense of sheer panic, actually, at certain times. It just really seemed huge. All of a sudden, what seemed like a manageable project. And I think a lot of that was because we were recreating something that had to be very precise and very specific. We couldn't just run it off on the machine. We had to recreate it as it was, as it had been sewn.
I could actually spiritually feel the dress drawn me to it. And I know it sounds, to some people it sounds weird, but I actually did feel it. And I went up to the cabinet and we couldn't really see the dress because it's in very low light and it's brown from the after being in the bog. But it was absolutely astounding to me to see it. It was just amazing. It was fabulous. I loved it. So the whole history of that spoke to me to make me feel something about this dress, And as I said, I felt the dress talking to me.
I couldn't perceive an idea of anything that looked so elegant. And it was elegant when you really looked at it. It had a style and elegance. And you just couldn't believe that it would be so roughly stitched. We weren't creating that wonderful, beautiful brown bog-stained thing. We were creating our own version.
Once we had identified the expertise in the local community, and that very much was built around the Rosalind Fanning and the Bernie Stapleton, so they were the individuals who were going to be able to make the dress. But we also wanted to explore the materials that went into creating the dress and also the colours. So we then involved a number of additional artists, and what they did was they brought us an understanding through community workshops on the natural dyeing process that was involved in the early 17th century, and also how wool was processed. And that's the journey that we replicated in 2024 also in terms of making the dress.
My foot turns that wheel, which has a band here, which drives this. I'm Janet White-Spunner. I was in Shinrone in Milltown Park. I was married to my husband in 1964, and so I've been in the area ever since. We were farming in Milltown, so I was a farmer's wife. That will break without any bother, pull apart any way you like. But the minute I've accumulated spin there, I let that spin down into that, is as strong as can be. And that goes whether it's linen, whether it's sheep, alpaca, whatever it is. That spin will give strength. Many years ago in Milltown, I had a sort of a cottage industry. I had a few spinning wheels which I gave to people in their own houses, and I had some knitters from our own sheep, mostly. And then Kevin Dooley, as he now is, his father before him, who's the wool merchant here, he would save me any nice coloured fleeces because I never actually dyed the wool. I used the natural colours. I taught myself, and I remember being in the shop where I bought the first wheel, and I said to the lady there, and my name must have come up somehow. I said, "Do you think I'll ever be able to spin?" And she said, Well, with a name like yours, how couldn't you? So that's the spunner.
This is literally my iron mordant. So it's literally made from rusty nails. You can hear them in there. And just one drop of that can really change quite a big vat of colour. So this is one that you would add with a dropper. I am Wild Food Mary, otherwise known as Mary Bulfin. And in this project, I was invited on to do a little section on wild food plant dyes, because, you know, it's one of the most fascinating things about the gown. Number one, you're wondering who she was and where she was going and everything, but we'd love to know what colour it was. So we had fun just experimenting with dyes and trying them out. The word mordant comes from French mordir, to bite. So the mordanting process is what makes the colour stick on the fabric. And then for an iron mordant, you would literally gather up rusty metal and throw it into a mixture of vinegar and water and leave it there for several weeks, which I did. And that would sadden colours or darken them. And then for the opposite, if you want to lighten colours, you used alum. And that for me is fascinating as well, because you can take a vat of dye and just put a couple of little drops of iron into it, and it transforms the colour and also makes it more permanent. We were just having fun, basically. It was a little bit challenging, I suppose, because I'm such a beginner in dye, but that was part of the fun as well, not knowing what you were going to have at the end when you pop something into that saucepan and you're going, fingers crossed, I hope it doesn't turn black and I hope it doesn't fall apart. And let's just see what comes out of this. Taking something with an idea in your head of what you're going to produce at the end, it's certainly not colour by numbers.
Bringing together a series of workshops which looked at how we carded wool and how we dyed wool and how we made little peg dolls allowed members of the community to get real hands-on. So it was no longer this kind of abstract concept. This was people, some who had various expertise in terms of artists down to small children, all came along, got that opportunity to stitch, cut panels, use the templates, dye some elements, card some wool.
Pattern to follow based on what Cass McGann, Reconstructing History, had made. She had been given privileged access to this, and so we were working from her specific pattern. So yes, it would appear that it was simple, but it wasn't, and that meant a lot of nail biting.
23 panels in the skirt, right? Each panel between 10 and 12 inches wide at the top and slightly wider at the bottom. And then each of those panels, they're stitched together. And then each of those panels that are stitched together have 4 quills in it. So we put all the quills on the outside. I said, Rosalind, this is the way to do it. And we put them all on the outside and it was wrong. We had to rip it out and redo it. But anyway, it was fine.
Huge admiration then for tailors and makers, and I think in this era we tend to be dismissive of, oh, they didn't really know stuff, but oh my gosh, they did, they really did.
All the quills have to be evenly spaced between one another, and you could do what you liked, and some of them would not sit right. So they'd have to, manoeuvre it and twist it and pull it, and oh my goodness me. But I'd say there's definitely over a kilometre of stitching in it.
The level of tailoring in the Shinrone gown is incredibly high, from the vertical darts in the back of the dress to the fact that there's a double width of fabric at the end of the bodice. And only through recreating that will you understand the weight of it, the feel of it, and the complexity of having to be able to create triangular gores and that really, really high quality of tailoring to create a skirt like that on a dress. It's not just a simple case of creating a bodice and a skirt. It's how it's all stitched together, which can only be achieved through recreating it.
There was no pregnancy clothes in those days, maternity clothes. So on the different stages of pregnancy, as our belly grew, the dress grew with the belly. If you didn't put those darts in, the front of the dress would swoop down and hit the floor. So putting the darts in, it brought the dress up to the same level as the back. And as the belly grew, the dress went out with her belly up till the 9-month pregnancy, and it didn't lose its shape. It was still beautiful. So, and then easy to sew back in again to bring the dress when she wasn't pregnant. Brilliant idea.
The lena, the undergarment, became this sort of sudden dawning realization, oh, we're not just doing the gown, we have to put it over something, and something that's relevant. So I didn't want to do anything necessarily as slavishly historical with that. And a lot of my family up north were involved with linen and linen making. And so we sourced the linen from the north. So that became, it was almost as if the lena became the interconnection between north and south. That makes me, because of all the horrors that have gone on. And an Ireland united through the remaking of a gown. But anyway.
Some girl looked out her window and she looked across the field and she saw her dad's sheep. And she thought, that sheep, this dress.
There was this law that said the Irish couldn't wear the wonderful voluminous sleeves that they did, which is part of their style of that era. That was pretty much the norm. The ruling classes over the other classes was to make them look grey and dull. But the reality is nobody knows what the colour of the gown was. We only know from very few historical illustrations that they loved colour and that they were stylish. Bernie was the one who, she said, I see it in blue. And the blue was there. Suddenly the blue was there, and it works, and it's beautiful, and it's so much associated with old Ireland. Our feeling is that the dress either fell off the back of a cart, or simply it was so much used, it was eventually used to wrap some precious object. Something else may unfold, but may it be happy.
There was sometimes in the evening when I'd sit in my own house and I'd be doing a little bit of sewing in the evening, and I imagined that the girl was talking to me. My own vision of it was she was eloping. And this dress was so beautiful and bulky, a big dress. So she wasn't going to walk out of the village with this gorgeous dress on her, so she had to hide it. So she went up to collect the turf, hid it in the creel of the donkey, hid it in the bog, went back home, and then decided on her way out she'd collect the dress. But for whatever reason, she couldn't collect the dress. So that's my feeling of the dress. That was what I think she was telling me.
During Heritage Week, we had a grand reveal of the dress. And that was wonderful because we had Noel McMahon, that very individual who right back at the start of the journey had raised our awareness of the dress through his history book and interest in history, and he was there that evening to see that. And I know, if I recall correctly, that he was quite moved by the dress because he had said since he was 17 that he had always wanted to see the dress back in Shinrone.
Their legacy to be able to say, we did this, we came together, we recreated this gown, and it's something that I really hope that the community is incredibly proud of, because they should be.
We all helped each other and we all learn, and we have great fun as well. You make lifelong friends doing a project like this.
I think it's fabulous. It's amazing all the pleats that are in it and how it was made. And yeah, there's a mystery there.
There were so many wonderful, magical things that happened, and just that sort of expansion of who we met and what we found out. And so it really was an amazing experience, nerve-wracking as it could often be. And I had such fun with Bernie.
It's given me new life. It's given new life to the dress as well, but it's given me new life and new purpose, really.
In Ireland in particular, it's the local that's important to people. So where you're from and what's from there, and local pride, in your area. So we're really delighted, at the kind of proactive approach that's being taken here by the local Offaly community for this dress.
The Shinrone Gown represents so many of our ancestors who lived in South Offaly in the early 17th century. The dress has become a physical manifestation of how our ancestors farmed, grew wool, crafted dresses, design awareness in the early 17th century. And I suppose we look at that today, 400 years later, and we can recognise all those elements. It will now be placed in the Shinrone National School Museum, where it will be available for anybody to see. And its story continues then, just as it did in 1620 and 2024, into the future, as the next generation of students come through the National School and will all ask, what's its story and what does it represent for us here in South Offaly?